Hey everyone, tonight begins a series of videos on the Rock Warrior's Way. I just started my climbing journey about 2 years ago. This is my 3rd year in, but my martial arts journey started in 2005. An old friend invited me to his dojo where they trained American freestyle. I did that for 7 years, and after my move to the beautiful hills and mountains of North Carolina, I began another style called Danzan Ryu that also changed my life. Now, in my 2nd decade of training, after having fought MMA, kickboxing, I've done grappling tournaments, I've done judo tournaments. I now teach a blend of Danzan Ryu and American freestyle. But let's get back to the crag. A lot of times I'll find myself at the crag talking to other people, and this book always comes up. And I always end up inquiring about what their favorite parts were, what did they enjoy about it, what was the premise of the book, because I had never read it. And I always seem to get the same answer. Well, it's sorta about mental game, like climbing training, and it's about climbing and mental game. I'm like, what did you like about it the most? Well, there's a part about like falling practice, and really the more I inquired, the more I understood that nobody has actually read this book. That's why I created the LCC, the Literacy for Climbers Coalition. Here, we want to help climbers learn to read again so that they too can read The Rock Warrior's Way from front to back. This series is really about summarizing what's in this book and applying it to martial arts and other areas of life. Arno Ilgner explains that he borrowed from the ancient traditions to create this book. And I've read some of the books he's read. Those books span more than just climbing. He just applies it to climbing. And therefore, we can apply it to many other things, including martial arts. So without further ado, let's talk about The Forward by John Long. You guys remember this guy from the Dawn Wall? Because the Dawn Wall can't actually speak, they needed an antagonist. So they found John Long. And he did a great job. What I like about him is his candidness. So let's get right to it. John Long, in this forward, talks about his interpretation of the Rock Warrior Way training program. And he talks about how it is a roadmap for success. But he wants to help you orient to understanding what you're about to get into while you're reading the Rock Warrior's Way. And there's 3 things that he pointed out. 1, first accept that life is hard and that transforming our life or our abilities, which amount to the same thing, is very hard. I really appreciate this quote for a couple of reasons, because I think the transformation process is one of the most difficult things that anyone can undergo, whether it's in martial arts, relationships, or other hobbies. Focusing on yourself and breaking old habits that were installed either consciously or unconsciously that became habitual are extremely difficult to break. And he points that out right away, that this is not going to be easy. Topic number 2, the work is a process, and that process lasts a lifetime. Every time you gain a new plateau, a massive of unrealized potential soars above you. In this sense, you never arrive. I love that quote. Process of breaking through to the next level never ends. That's why climbing, martial arts are lifelong practices, because they mimic the stuff of life. It doesn't end. I know many people in martial art who are constantly evolving their entire art. Right now, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is extremely popular, and I do an art called Danzan Ryu. Danzan Ryu does not have a lot of ground game, but the components of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are in there, and it's my belief that transforming myself into a better martial artist requires me to understand other arts as well and learn them and incorporate them into myself. That process lasts a lifetime, and that process in climbing happens all the time as well. It's an ever-evolving mental challenge. Whether you've hurt your shoulder, wrists, finding routes that you can do. If you're that far out of the game, maybe teaching others. But it is a lifelong process, constantly transforming yourself and your old habits to better, more efficient ones. The last thing, the 3rd thing he mentions, the qualities you bring to game day will be the exact same qualities you cultivate during practice. Wow. I can't tell you how accurate that is in so many things. So let's start with martial arts. There's always a big debate that if a martial artist was confronted with real life violence, that he would do this thing. And in Rory Miller's Meditations on Violence, he advocates to all martial artists, do not equate sparring with real life violence. They are two separate things. There's a little overlap, like in a Venn diagram, but they are very different. And I also hear people say sometimes, well, if I was in a real fight, I would just do this. No, if you practice grappling, you're gonna be grappling. If you practice kickboxing, you will be kickboxing. Because what we practice every single day is what we do. So let's bring it back to climbing. What do we practice when we climb? Do we practice socializing? Do we practice our communication as a lead belayer? Do we practice supporting our belay? Do we practice placing good gear? What do we practice every time we approach run out, especially in North Carolina? What do we practice when we hit the crux? What mental processes are happening? Because they are habitual and we are practicing them every time, whether we know it or not, when we get on the rock. There's one other part of this that I would like to bring up, and that's in relationships, because I believe, again, these themes echo the stuff of life. How do we practice with our partner being the best we can? How do we practice being vulnerable? When you eat together, are you eating great food that energizes you? Or are you eating food that makes you tired and want to take naps together? What are you practicing? Do you practice communicating? Do you practice so that when the tidal wave of life hits you in climbing, in martial arts, or your relationship, so that you are prepared? Do you go with your partner to the gym of relationships so that you can practice for when things get hard? John Long goes on to talk about a recreational climber's experience. Halfway up the climb, she transcends her daily stressors and morphs into a different person. But when she confronts the summit head wall and her abilities are stretched to the breaking point, the different person reverts to old habits. This is what I'm talking about, the tidal wave of life. When that head wall approaches, what have you practiced to overcome it? Because if you haven't practiced, you will revert to your old habit. And what are those old habits? What do they bring to the table? Are they efficient? Are they thoughtful? Are they conscious? Because I believe part of this book, as we go through this journey together, is going to unveil those things to us and about ourselves. I see this often in martial arts. Old habits. Often when somebody grabs you, the thought is, no, I need to release this. It's an old habit because you don't want somebody possessing. But when you experience and become educated in the art, you'll realize that you have them as much as they have you. And because that perspective can shift, you're no longer afraid. And John Long goes on to say, and all of our reactions are steeped in our old fear-driven patterns with all our survival instincts attached. I see this in martial arts when I roll with new people. They're so tense, and it's because it's a survival mechanism coming out. Roll with a black belt, they're loose, they're relaxed, because they've seen so much. How do we apply that concept to climbing? I believe this book is going to reveal that. Or better yet, how do we apply that to relationships? What are the old patterns that come out when we get hurt? What are the old patterns that come out when we get scared or become fearful? Are we conscious of them? John goes on to say that the more you integrate these principles into your daily life, the more powerful they will work for you on the face of the tidal wave. Lastly, John says, the masters of old must be smiling down from the clouds, knowing their sacred tradition is being carried out in exciting and remarkable new ways. And here we are together, creating more ways to view this wonderful, wonderful material. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. Next week, we will do the preface.